And predominantly it was Asian American, no question about it. When you go there, you see, at least in the early days, it's changed a little bit now, but in the early days, definitely Asian American. To me, that's two examples of individuals now moving out of the single ethnic context, establishing Asian American churches that are transcending ethnic differences within the single ethnic church. Everyone following that so far in terms of now we have this development of an Asian American church, generational second and third. 1, 2, 3, fourth step. What are we seeing now? Intentionally, many of the Asian American churches and new churches that are being established are now following the principle of multi-ethnicity. Wanting to say, okay, we move beyond the single ethnic, and we need to even move beyond the Asian American, and we must move now into a truly multi-ethnic model. And many church planters now, particularly in the urban context, are moving in that direction and wanting to establish multi-ethnic churches. And there are a lot of young Asian pastors who are involved in planting those kinds of churches. And of course, it is attracting also numerous Asian Americans into those churches. The last numbers I heard, Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York, which I would place in that multi-ethnic category, is probably close to 50% Asian in terms of who shows up on a Sunday morning. You would almost think you were in an Asian American church if you walked in. But intentionally designed to be multi-ethnic, diversified staff in which they hired Asian Americans on their staff alongside of other ethnic groups, and the desire then is to be a multi-ethnic church. So if someone were to ask me today, what does Asian American Christianity and the Asian American church look like? I would say it's all three. We still have single ethnic churches. We still have Asian American churches that are predominantly Asian American, and we have now multi-ethnic churches in which there are numerous Asian Americans involved in those churches, establishing them, leading them, participating. And in my opinion, all three I praise God about. I am not one to say, as some have, that one form is better than the other. I think there are reasons for all three. And in all three cases, God is using them to reach others with the gospel, both Asian Americans and those who are not Asian Americans, involved in all three of those churches. I say that just to give you a picture of a broad stroke of the history of what I see happening in the Asian American context here in North America in the churches, which includes our Reformed Asian American churches. They're part of that history too. They're in that history as well. That can be broadly discussed, but also very specifically for our context. Now, I don't want to take up too much time here, but let me just describe some of the things that I'm witnessing, I'm seeing in terms of the trends and movements of Asian American Christianity, and what will it look like, and what type of setting will you go into as you leave Westminster. For some, all these options are available, and many of you will go into all of these options. Single ethnic church, multi-ethnic church, Asian American church. I would imagine we'll have representation from Westminster students in all of those categories, and we already do. But I am convinced there is something going on today that is very different than the history I just laid out. I am convinced that the age of globalization and the global church now must be taken into account as we think about the future. You see, in the old days, immigration was what? Immigration was coming to North America, because there was more, primarily, financial opportunity for you and for your children, better educational system, better hope for the future, and that's why many of our ancestors immigrated to North America. The world is not what it was in the 19th and 20th century anymore. Asia has awoken now. In terms of just the economic shifts that we are seeing in the global world, there is no question that North America and Europe are not the only players in the game anymore. That we are seeing in Asia now huge opportunity, particularly in the economic and financial worlds. And there's great interest, even in American companies, right, to invest and partner in Asia right now. If you are bilingual right now and headed off into business and industry, you would have a valuable commodity to place on your job resume, because so many companies want to invest and partner in Asia. If you are bilingual in Korean or bilingual in Chinese, that's a huge advantage, right? Absolute huge advantage. To the point where we have a lot of these private schools in North America now, which, as part of the curriculum, they're teaching young kids who are not even Asian Mandarin skills, believing, as many parents, and parents are flocking to put their kids into these schools because that's what they believe will give their child an advantage in business in particular in the future. Asia is what everyone's looking at. And that impact, I would argue, affects the church as well. Immigration is not just one way anymore, Asia to North America. If I were to diagram that, I would show a line going from multi-ethnic church, Asian American church, single ethnic church, instead of directionally this way, all three now pointing back to Asia, in which there is back and forth going on right now in an unprecedented way than we've seen at any time in Asian American history in North America. And it's not just for business purposes and opportunity financially. There is great ministry opportunity in that context as well. I've spent the last 3-4 years now going to Asia at least once a year, intentionally, to go and see what's happening. I wanted to see with my own eyes. I went to Seoul, Korea, Beijing, China, Shanghai, Singapore, Taipei, Jakarta, Indonesia, to see with my own eyes what's happening. Because I read all about it, I hear people discuss it, but I said, I gotta go see it. And I have to admit, it was very much by the prompting of my wife, who has a real global vision, to say, before we have kids, go. Let's go and take a look. Let's go and see what's happening out there. Because if Philip Jenkins and other global watchers are correct, then these massive shifts are shifts in the church as well, in which the growth of Christianity in those contexts will eclipse, if they have not already, North America and Europe. Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared for what is happening out there, given that there is much more back and forth and ability to move in ministerial context between Asia and North America as well? What does that lead you to think about and pray about here at Westminster? For some of you, pray about going. Pray about going to Asia. Pray about reversing the immigration trend, if I could put it that way, and going from North America to a location in Asia for ministry. There is need out there. There is great need, and don't let language be a barrier. Learn a second language, but even if you are not as proficient, still there is opportunity. I'm amazed in Korea at the trend happening right now, which we're only starting to see the beginning of. As a generation of senior ministers are retiring in churches in North Korea, it's amazing how many Korean American pastors are being called back to Korea to pastor.
You mean like South Korea?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm talking about churches in Korea. I can name at least 2 or 3 churches right now who have called Korean American pastors to go back and pastor there. Even if you feel like, well, my Korean ability, my language abilities aren't that strong. I had the opportunity, the privilege to preach in an English ministry context in Seoul. 3 services this church had. Over 450 people showing up for every service in English. How many of your EMs are that big here in America? God may be calling you to go and be a part of ministering to all of what is happening in terms of the growth of Christianity there. Think about China. Westminster has a PhD and THM program. And let me be very frank about it. If you go through our program and intend to seek a job at a seminary or a university in America, you're going to have a hard time because it's a seminary PhD. There's just a bias against it. They prefer you have a university PhD. But I see the goal of our program, not just to serve the church in America, but to serve the church globally, in which one of the greatest needs I see is theological education. And if you leave this place with a higher degree as a THM or a PhD, to be able to go and teach in places like China, Taiwan, Indonesia, where there is need for theological teachers.